if I treat her nicely or whatever, maybe she'll be nicer back to me, et cetera, et cetera. But
Sure.
again, it's that debt you didn't know you had to pay, and the deadline was yesterday, and you're getting beat up for it, kind of thing.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you again. I hope you're doing well. I just want to take the chance to introduce Dustin, a friend of mine I've just spoken to. A fellow sufferer of ADHD, a very abusive mother who was cold and distant, would always say, "You're embarrassing me," didn't give him room to be himself, judged him, was somewhat unpredictable, generally very abusive. I really enjoyed this conversation from a personal perspective because it's one I could definitely relate to. And Dustin and well, I've just called him my friend, but he wasn't before we recorded, and now he definitely is. I think we bonded over a lot of similar stories, and it's a conversation I think you're really going to enjoy, particularly if you've been through, abusive upbringings, you've struggled with ADHD, with self-doubt, self-loathing, second-guessing yourself, where we think some of those things have come from, and also some strategies to heal from them, which we get into at the end of the conversation. He works in higher education now, trying to do the best for other young people and children who have been through things like we have. And yeah, super nice guy that I think you can learn a lot from. I really hope you're going to enjoy the conversation. Thanks.
From what I've seen from your videos, you kind of focus on, life experiences and how that kind of shapes, I guess, who we are today. I meant to get more into that one video that you posted. You're interviewing I don't know if he's homeless or, what I'm talking about.
Yeah, for sure. I shot that video. His name's Bob. I shot that video in 2017. So that was the first ever bit of content I tried to make. And you can see how amateur it was, just
Right.
because it was shot on a little GoPro, and I was so anxious and nervous and not the person I am now. Just,
Right.
you have
Yeah.
to start somewhere.
Right.
But I'm very proud of it in the weirdest way, because it was just my first go at it. Why? What were you going to ask?
Well, no, I was thinking about, for me, like, would I have the sense of comfort or like the confidence to do that kind of thing? So I appreciated, I guess, also like from a human perspective, like you sitting down talking and like getting to know a person that, most often a person would just kind of walk past them. And actually taking the time to like engage with a person on a human level, as opposed to, no, I don't have any change, just leave me alone kind of thing.
Sure.
Like I live about an hour away from New York City, and that's kind of like the social survival when you go into the city is, you see a person on the street holding a sign or whatever, and you don't even look at them necessarily, and you kind of lose touch with humanity in that regard, because this is a person existing in that spot, and that most likely is going to be where they're going to be sleeping that night. And unfortunately, the thing you're taught pretty quickly is like, don't engage with them, don't look at them, because it's going to either cause trouble or they're going to want something from you, etc. And I don't know. It's just such a conflicted approach to dealing with humanity. Like you see a person in suffering in clearly very difficult times, and if that somehow were me, what kind of resentment or bitterness would I feel towards humanity in that regard?
From what I know, homeless people's interaction, one of the things they find most difficult is being ignored and
Yeah.
someone looking at them and then looking away. And
Right.
that is generally the approach that most people in society take, because you're trained to
Right.
think, oh, this guy doesn't know how to do life, therefore
Mm-hmm.
he must be dangerous or
Right. Yes.
not worth talking to or something like
Yeah.
that. And the truth is, they're just people like us who haven't
Right.
managed to adapt. And I see myself in them because of my own experiences in life with my mother and the abuse that I went through.
Mm-hmm.
And I started filming a documentary in 2021. I cycled from where I live in near Amsterdam in the Netherlands to southwest England, interviewing homeless people along the way. And
Mm-hmm.
every single person that I spoke to, every homeless person, had been abused, been neglected by a caregiver or a parent,
Mm-hmm.
and hadn't learnt to love themselves. They'd learnt that they weren't worth anything, that they were not valuable to people, to society, and they're kind of pushed into the sidelines. And so I see myself in that, and I see you in that as well. And I see lots of people who have struggled with mental health issues in the same spot, but for some reason they haven't, or we haven't fallen into that category. I
Right.
have been close to being homeless, and I don't have any family. I don't have any real support network other than my partner, just because of
Mm.
all my abuse. So I can empathize with them, you know.
Sure. Yeah, and that's I was thinking too about like, when my kids get older and we eventually go down to the city, invariably I'm sure we're gonna see, a homeless person or two in the city. And kids are naturally curious and they want to know, they might want to know about that person or why are they on the street or what does that sign say or, why do they look that way basically is, I'm sure what will catch their attention and, and then or I might find myself reflexively going, don't go near that person, don't talk to them or whatever, just because that's like like I said, that's kind of the training that I got going into the city was like, you don't engage. But yeah, there's that part of it that's like, I'm referring to a human being who, for one reason or another, or an unfortunate series of things, either the span of their life or in more recent times, what have you, who's on the street. And this is where they reside. And unfortunately for them, their options are limited to like, would you want to go to like a homeless shelter where most likely you're going to get your stuff stolen or you might get abused or you might get assaulted in some way? Or do you take your risk living out in the elements? And how is I guess for me in my head, I'm like, how is society? How are we kind of okay with that? And also you see, I don't know about you, but in where I live, like they have benches that are specifically designed so that you can't lay on them. Like they'll have like a bench that's the length of like a 6 foot person, let's say, but there's a handlebar in the middle of it so that you can only sit, you can't lay on it.
Hmm.
Um, there's architectural designs set up so that a person can't lean against something, they can't lay on something. Police, harassing them or let me see your identification and all that stuff. And just a very cold and cruel approach to a problem that society kind of overlooks because we, for one reason or another, it's just I don't want to deal with this and I don't want this in my area kind of thing.
And for me, that's almost exactly what I'm trying to get at, is that people who live on the streets, or homeless people, anyone with mental health issues, someone who can't get a job, they have come from a terrible background where they've been abused or neglected or made to feel that they're not loved. And so
Mm,
they choose to stay away from people. They see people as dangerous, or
right.
they believe that they don't deserve a home, so they don't chase one. There are lots of non-profits and charities that get millions and millions of dollars every year from governments all over the world to look after homeless people and take them off the streets and keep them safe and give them places to take drugs safely.
Right.
But they're not actually serving the problem. They're not actually curing the problem. And actually, they don't want to cure the problem because they get millions and millions and millions of dollars, euros, pounds
Hmm.
every year for these sort of facilities. So they actually don't care about serving homeless people in a sense.
Yeah.
The only way to help people is to prevent it happening in the future to other people. And that's what I'm going after. It's a very tricky problem. And with perception in society that they are dangerous, they must be avoided, don't look at them, don't talk to them, they'll harass you. People fail to engage and understand where their problems have really come from. And as I said, it's just like you and us. I mean, let me dive into it. You said your mother was abusive when you were younger. And I've written down here, you're embarrassing me,
Right.
which is
Yeah.
something personal you told me the other day. But I'm curious to know what sort of emotion that brings up for you. I know I've put you on the spot, so I'll give you a second.
No, that's fine. I've kind of thought this through a couple of times. I have learned in my experiences to intellectualize things. So I typically operate in the intellectual sphere as more than the emotional one. It's more of like it's like a protective measure, if that makes sense. Like I can piece together things, I can pull things apart, I can make things kind of make sense, which is somewhat maladaptive. And it's kind of knowing when to trust the feeling part of it. And with statements like that, it was kind of a mix of, okay, am I, I'm playing the mental games of being like 12, let's say, trying to figure out, am I embarrassing myself? Am I embarrassing her? Is there something to this? Like, am I really that out of control? And typically, I don't think that was necessarily the case. It was more of like, you know, a brash 12-year-old boy just having fun in a lot of ways. Um, but for me, the emotional component is a mix of shame, like I don't want to embarrass myself or my mother or whatever, and a degree of anxiety because how or when is this going to present itself again in the future? Um, Especially if that messaging is communicated somewhat frequently, then it becomes, how am I doing that? Like, it's one thing to say to somebody, the behavior that you exhibited, like, when you were running around in the at the bowling alley, let's say, was really disruptive, and you almost ran into somebody. When you give somebody like the realistic sense of how their behavior could impact someone else or themselves, that's one thing. Like, that's usable tools to be aware of next time, let's say. But when
Sure.
you act a certain way and a parent or an adult responds really strongly to you, but doesn't explain to you why they're so frustrated, let's say, and you get into the car and they say, you're really embarrassing in there, this, and that, the ambiguity of the statement is judgmental, but it's also leaves you with very little to work with. So the shame is immediate. It's like a splash of cold water on you. But then there's also, at least for me, it was the, wait, what did I do that was so embarrassing? Or where, how was I acting in such a way that, and who am I embarrassing? Am I embarrassing myself? Am I embarrassing my mother? What's happening here in this regard? So, like, when I talk with my kids about, behavior, let's say in a restaurant, I will always try to preface it with something specific if there's a misbehavior, like getting up out of their chair and like running around the restaurant, which we don't allow our kids to do that. We will cut that off as quick as possible. But I mean, my oldest is 3.5. Like, she's every bit of a 3.5-year-old.
And she's great. She
So
seems adorable from the
thank
little I've
you.
seen of
Thank
her. I
you.
think you've done a good job.
I appreciate that. But we'll talk with her. That's the most important part. Like, we'll lay out for her the specifics. And we also are very careful about not framing this as you're a bad kid or you misbehave all the time. It's, listen, in the restaurant, you were getting up out of your chair, you knocked into someone else's chair. I always say, like, people don't come to restaurants, they don't come to the grocery store to be knocked into or for you to knock things over on the shelves. Like, people take a lot of time and effort to stock this place and make it look nice. The least we can do is behave in this place. And like I said, I always try to frame things from a specific, measurable way and try to give her next steps whenever I can. And if I'm feeling super frustrated about something, or if I'm really emotionally involved in the process, I will do the best I can to take that deep breath and really try to remind myself of, this is my child. Communication's important. My frustration is temporary and it will go away. So if I don't watch what I say or do now, this may become a bit of a habit. And I don't want my kid to tense up or anticipate, daddy's getting upset and now I'm going to have to deal with the fallout, if you will. So that was, for me, from my experiences with my mom specifically, but my parents to an extent, it was a lot of ambiguity. It was a lot of immediate shame and guilt about things, but not really being given the conversation or the tools to do anything about it either, and it's just like that walking on eggshells of, am I going to upset mom, or, what's going to kind of happen here? And am I truly embarrassing myself or somebody? And, what do I do about all that? Or can I do anything about it?
Unfortunately for both of us, because my mother was the same as we discussed off camera, we weren't given constructive feedback. And I don't know about for you, but for me, it was always about my mother's feelings rather than helping me develop as a young child. Oh, you
Right.
embarrassed me. You made me look stupid. Or
Yeah.
why can you never behave? This is why
Right.
nobody likes you. And it's
Yes.
always very aggressive and mean statements that I think for both of us really left a mark until, and probably still leave some sort of a mark. They do for me until
Hmm.
you've got older and you start to realize that they weren't fair. That your mother was too self-absorbed and focused on herself to really nurture a young person.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a fair assessment. Um, And I will say, having had kids, like some of this is put into perspective of like just how much can happen chaotically in a house, in a restaurant, in a grocery store. Like there's a chain of events. Like I get it. The difference is catching it, catching my emotions, catching my reactiveness before it happens. You
As
know,
an adult,
like
you mean?
as an adult, as a parent myself right now. But that is when you talk about like not having the tools, like the training as a kid or as a young adult to like to do those things. The reparenting a thing and the catching yourself before you react is incredibly difficult and taxing. And I'm sure you can relate to this. Like when you don't trust yourself, like when you don't trust your approach to something, you second guess it, or you go, "I is this really the right way to? Am I doing this correctly? Because I know what didn't work, so I need to kind of come up with in the moment, almost like a new constructive plan." And then you kind of realize like, oh, I know my kid and I'm around her all the time and I'm establishing that trust and that rapport with them. I know how they act. I can work within the confines of their behavior and my expectations, but also remember that they're little. So, like whereas in like a restaurant, you don't want them running around, but you can give them, like, we have a backyard and that's the perfect place to like go nuts and have as much fun and yell and be as every bit of a kid as you can
Be a
be.
3-year-old.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
then also remind them, like, in this context, perfect. Maybe keep it down a little bit because the neighbors are giving us a weird look. But like when you're in certain environments, just look to me, look to what I'm doing, and modeling for them how to sit in the chair, how to eat properly, use your napkin, all that great stuff that, I don't know about you, but for me was kind of heavy-handedly reinforced in a very negative way.
Yeah, if you didn't do it, you got hit or slapped or shouted at.
Right.
And the difference between your mother and you, I'm assuming, not knowing you as well as you know you, is that
Right.
you're making a conscious choice to be a good role model, and you're balanced. And unlike your mother was, as I've written down, very unpredictable. And my mother was the same. You didn't know how she was going to react, if she'd be angry, aggressive, manipulative,
Mhm.
kind occasionally,
Right.
sweet occasionally.
Right.
And you talk about self doubt. I'm pretty confident that's where my self doubt comes from, because the person around you who you're essentially, looking for feedback in the environment from is
Right.
unpredictable. And
Mhm.
you don't know how they're going to react. And it makes you think, do I do this? Do I do that? Have I done that? We haven't even got into gaslighting, where someone will say to you, the plate in the restaurant was blue, when you knew in your head it was pink. And then you think, wait, was it blue?
Right.
I think that's the difference between you and your mother. I think you're going to be a very good parent, or you sound like a very good parent already, because you're stable, predictable. It's not about you. It's about you doing the best you can for your child, despite you having to work a job and do everything else you've got to do. You're
Right.
focused on the little thing you're trying to raise, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And on it, like I've been to therapy and I'm back in therapy and it's been awesome. Um,
As awesome
and
as therapy can be, when you pick apart your entire life and realize half of it's messed up.
right. Well, you know what it was too? It's like I guess I think about it sometimes like, how like I've never broken a bone, but like, if someone breaks a bone, they have to like set it correctly so it can heal correctly.
Sure.
But you're always going to feel a little bit of that, either a little bit of pain or a little bit of discomfort in that spot where it broke, let's say. But a lot of childhood are these little tiny fractures, we'll call them. I don't know if the analogy is going to hold up, but um, if things aren't set correctly, like saying I'm sorry or having an honest conversation with somebody, especially a parent and child, these little things aren't set correctly. And then you're kind of gimping your way into adulthood, wondering why you're in so much pain, physically, emotionally, mentally, why you're having such a hard time keeping up with others, or at least the perception of which. And you go to therapy, let's say, and you can dive into the past. Like some therapists will focus on that. My guy uses CBT and REBT, so like cognitive behavioral and rational emotive behavioral therapy. And his part of his background is ADHD too, so it's been very helpful in that regard. And we do talk about the past at times, but we often focus on the here and now and like catching those negative thoughts, the thoughts informed, the beliefs inform the thoughts inform the behaviors, and it's like this triangle of action. And basically reframing and attacking black and white or all or nothing thinking and the if then statements that we have in our head or that we've been conditioned to believe from our experiences. And I have to say, in the months that I've been doing it, it has been very, I won't say transformative, but I will say it's been very good for me as a way of catching the negativity and unpacking it and saying, oh, well, you've been kind of running low on sleep the last couple of days and you're stressed because of X, Y, and Z events. Perhaps you're not being as kind to yourself or understanding or forgiving as you could be. And let's try to keep down the shoulds. Like, I should be doing all these things and really reprioritizing the wants. Like, what do I want to do in this, like when you reached out and we were talking, I remember thinking, I want to have this conversation. Like, I want to go into these things. Otherwise, I might become avoidant. I might, oh yeah, that sounds great, we'll talk, and then just kind of ignore it for a while or forget about it, whatever. But when I started reframing things into the I wants, I also began to realize, tying back to my mom kind of stuff, I'm not being selfish. Like, by acknowledging to myself what I want to do, I'm not inherently being selfish. I might be self-interested, and that's perfectly acceptable. It's just like
Totally
we talk
normal.
about. Yeah. And that's the craziest thing is like when you prioritize yourself and you prioritize your own care, you at first go like, well, like maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should be worrying about something else. And then you're like, no. If I want to jog or exercise, if I want to meditate, if I want to write my journal, if I want to record a podcast episode, I can do that for myself at a time that works for me or my wife or whatever. And that's not selfish. And I
No,
feel good doing that.
but it comes from our past in knowing that if you do something wrong or you do something that your mother or father don't like, you could get beaten up for it or yelled at or
Right.
hurt in some way. So you
Right.
doubt whether you should do what you want to do and you become a
Right.
people pleaser. And
Right.
I don't know if we discussed that, but I've certainly been a people pleaser most of my life where I've gone to the point of, trying to make other people happy to get love in return. And it's just
Right.
completely the wrong way of going about it.
Yeah. And to that point, the people pleasing thing and the all or nothing and the catastrophic thinking and everything, those early childhood experiences, the unpredictability of how is so and so going to respond, and like you said, what can I do to kind of shore up some credit with this person so that they will like me or love me more or show me some kindness, let's say, especially if you really like need it from a parent, and then you're still dealing with the is this, are they going to respond in kind, or are they just going to kind of take advantage of that kindness and walk all over me, as it were? And then again, you're left going back to the drawing board of, wait, did this actually work or not? Is this actually how things work? And then I don't know about you, like I would go into jobs and like, new experiences, and I would try to find somebody that I felt like I could connect to. And then I'd be like, well, this person must like me, so I'm going to do everything I can to make them happy, not realizing that not everybody has the same motivations I do or the same interests that I do. And you meet some people along the way and you're like, oh, you're just going to kind of say whatever you need to say to get me to do the thing you need me to do, if that makes sense.
Right. And
So
you stop trusting adults in your life because you start thinking they're going to behave the same way that your mother did.
yeah, and then when you reprioritize yourself and hold yourself accountable, but also other people to high expectations, you begin to see who's truly kind of on your side or not. Whether it's a platonic friendship, a romantic relationship, whatever. I think that's how my wife and I work, is that we hold each other accountable to, I hold myself accountable to myself, but also to her, and vice versa. And we'll have our arguments and all that stuff, and that's all part of it, but we keep the conversation going, and the whole focus is on what can we do differently next time, let's say, so that we can prevent a problem, or we can work towards a common goal, or what are the ideas that you have on this situation, and what am I thinking, let's say, and how can we kind of collaboratively come together on a solution that meets both of our needs, if that makes sense. Um, And it's not a perfect system. It's just like with my parenting approach. Like I'm not the perfect husband or parent by any means, but I give a damn. So I'm going to try my best, and I'm not going to just give up on any hangups that might happen or any roadblocks that might happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, you can't be perfect. There
Right.
is no such thing as perfect, unless we're talking about, mathematics, for example.
Right.
You can never get things 100% correctly, but what you can do is just try and be better than the people we had nurturing us as children, people that were self-centered and didn't really care about us and just saw us as something to give them love. Did you
Right.
ever find when growing up that if you pleased your mother or your father or did something that they liked, they might treat you better for a short time because they'd had their needs fulfilled, regardless of whether or not you got your needs fulfilled?
Um, I'm sure that did happen. Struggling to think of a specific example. I think anything and everything that I could do to make my mother look good it was good for
Appreciated.
her. Right. It was good for her, which meant it was in my best interest. But at the same time, it was very temporary. It was like currying favor with somebody for a short span of time until the next situation. Or if I did make a mistake, let's say, and embarrassed her in some way, then we'd kind of start over again. It's like this debt that you didn't know that you had to pay back, that you could never pay back despite any and all efforts, once you kind of figured out the rules of the game, basically.
That's a great way of thinking about it. A debt a short-term debt. What did you say? A short-term debt that you can't pay
Yeah,
back?
it's kind of like it's kind of like if you were borrowing credit you didn't know you were borrowing in the short of the long term,
Right.
that you didn't know you had to pay back, and then occasionally you just happen to pay off the interest or whatever, the capital on it, and you're like, oh, I guess I did something good here. But you also learn, or at least I learned pretty quickly, not to get too settled into that good feeling because the other shoe will invariably drop on some level, which, reinforces anxiety. Or if you're like me, if you focus too much in the past, it's a lot of rumination. Um, and I actually produced an episode not long ago about positive reflective strategies, in part because I noticed for a while, whenever I would reflect on situations like bullying, let's say in middle school or high school or elementary school, whatever, it was always from the perspective of something is mathematically wrong in the situation, and the incorrect part of the equation is me. Like I'm doing something incorrectly, so that's causing other people to not like me or not want to be my friend or not want to sit with me at the table, let's say. And then as I got older, like I'm approaching 40, when I got into my 30s more so, I began to realize no, that's the incorrect part, is me assuming that I'm the problem. So
It's
yeah.
no, but you go.
No, please go ahead.
Well, it's difficult because I'm going through this at the moment with a couple of friends in my friendship group. In that I realize I've been a people pleaser and I've been disingenuous in that I've
Hmm.
been doing things for them to court love.
Right.
And at some point, you do have to sit back and analyze your own behavior and accept that whether you meant it or not, whether it was
Hmm.
conscious or self conscious or malicious or not, you do have a role to play in those interactions. But it's
Hmm.
difficult to pick apart it's difficult to not just go, what have I done wrong? Why has this happened to me? What have I done? Bad kid, bad me. To okay, well, they've reacted a certain way. They've done this. They've thought about something. They've been triggered. But I must think that actually I could have done this slightly different, and perhaps they didn't like that. Maybe if I'd said this a slightly different way. I guess that's like all or nothing thinking, right? Black or white thinking. It's gone from all me to maybe I could have done this bit a little bit differently.
Right. Yeah, I look at it like trying to find the shades of gray in the viewpoint, the perspective. Like if it is all or nothing in that regard, then you can't really win, or you really won't look at the perspective. You won't really be able to look at a situation objectively, or you might be obviously missing, let's say, some pieces to the whole puzzle. Like that's why like when my wife and I go to parties, like, or we used to, we don't really anymore, but Um, when we'd go to like these social events, I would periodically look over at her or like kind of or like talk to her on the side, be like, how am I doing? Am I being weird? Am I being uncomfortable? Um,
I still
and
do that occasionally. I
yeah,
still do it.
and I'll have my moments where like I either I have a little bit of alcohol in me and I'm a little little loose lipped, or I'm trying to be silly and it's just not landing correctly. And she'll kind of look at me and be like, just tone it down just a little bit. Just you're or I'll have other moments where I'm just so in my head that I'm a non-participant in conversation. I'm listening, I'm actively listening, but I'm so self-conscious now of myself and aware of my weirdness, quote unquote, that I'm really struggling to find the energy or the willingness to talk, because I've convinced myself I'm going to make a fool out of somebody.
And the difficulty is that whoever you're with, whether it's one person or a group of people, they do pick up on that, whether
Yes.
they will tell you or not. I think sometimes subconsciously they feel that your behavior is a little bit alien and a little bit weird, and they can't quite figure out what it is. And instantly that puts them off, again, whether it's consciously or self-consciously. It's the difficulty with trying to make friends with people that have no understanding of abuse and trauma. They've picked up a healthy set of behavioral cues that you've only got. It's like they've got the full rainbow and you're missing a couple of colors, you know?
Right. Yes. Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, that part of the instruction manual is missing,
They've
and
got
you're
coffee
kind
stains
of,
on it.
yeah, exactly, and you're kind of looking at other people, be like, how did you figure this out? Like, what was different here? And like that's why my wife and that's why I gravitated to her so quickly when we first met. Was in my head, I was like, oh, she's got it all figured out. She's quote unquote normal. And then I got to know her better, and I'm like, oh, it's not that she's normal. It's not that she's better than me socially or otherwise. It's just she was taught and coached in certain ways as a kid to be certain, to engage in conversation more intently and more politely. Whereas I have a tendency to withdraw, especially from people I don't necessarily know, or if I make like a snap decision or judgment about somebody. And it's hard for me to kind of get out of that headspace, if that makes sense. And she pushed me and continues to push me to find a comfort zone to stay engaged with people conversationally, or to make new connections and things like that. But and what I think she appreciated about me was that when she was in high school and in college, she was always friends with like the extroverted popular kids. So let's go party, let's go hang, she was always quote unquote very good at doing that. But on
Wonderful.
the inside, all she wanted to do was be home and like, watch a movie or do something comfy, and didn't really want to go out and do reckless stuff. And when her and I met, we were kind of feeling each other out, like, what are you like? This and that. And I was like, listen, she was like, oh, my friends are going to meet at this bar. And I looked at her, I'm like, is there any way we could just avoid that? And she looked at me and she's like, I absolutely don't want to go. I feel pressured to go. Like, I'll tell them we can't make it. I'm like, blame me. I'm the new boyfriend. Like, just put it on me. I don't care. And after a while, we were just like, look, we got more comfortable just telling our friends, like, look, we don't want to do that right now. Like, it's just not. I'm not feeling it. Like, we love you. We'll hang out with you at another time, but we're just gonna hang out together for a bit and just be homebodies. Like, we're totally cool with that. Um, and I have some friends that are like, how can you be home so much and like now with your kids? And I was like, it's just natural. Like, it just makes sense for us in our dynamic. Like, we do go out occasionally, but if she's like, listen, let's stay home this weekend and do nothing, I'm like, amazing. Like, that's so easy to do. I would much rather do that.
If you've grown up in a house that wasn't happy and was unpredictable, it's wonderful to have one that is stable, that you know is safe and you feel comfortable in, because
Yeah.
it's what we were missing growing up. Going on to if you don't mind talking
Yeah.
about your wife, because she's not here to defend herself, but to me, she also sounds a little bit like a people pleaser, because she's
Oh, yeah.
going out to bars or going out to do adventurous things with her friends when she really wants to be home.
Yeah.
Yet you speak about her as if she's not had as difficult a start in life as you have had. but it sounds like
No,
she
no,
has
no,
got
no.
her own pieces there as well.
No, yeah. I won't go into. I'll let her tell her story if she ever wanted to, but no, her.
I'd love to talk to her on a side note, just have our own conversation. But yeah, save the details. Just give us
Yeah.
a vague
Comparative to me, we
backstory.
both experienced a lot of early life difficulties and traumas. It's just different shades of experience. Um, and my my upbringing, my family was very cold and distant. We didn't talk, we didn't resolve problems, or rarely did. And like I told you, my mother's approach typically to apologizing was, "You're upset, and I'm sorry you feel that way," which is
Yeah,
very dismissive.
but that isn't an apology,
Her
is it?
No,
Really?
it's barely an acknowledgement of responsibility, if at all. But no, for my wife, it was a different circumstances for her family. But the difference is there was always love there, and there was always a sense of connection to each other. And whereas my family was living on an island separate from my parents and my brother, for her family, it was always keeping everyone together and working through things together. And when I met her and I met her family, I saw the stark difference between the two. And at first, it was very uncomfortable for me because my first reaction was like, "Why is your mother asking me so many questions about things?" Um, and my wife was
Why does
like,
she care
"She's an
what?
Italian mom. Like, she just wants to get to know you and she loves you. Like, she's taking care of you." And my first reaction was, "She's being very intrusive. What's her deal?" And
What's
then
she
after a
trying to get
while,
out of me? How is she trying to manipulate me?
and then over time, I was like, "Oh, she is genuinely asking me how my day is. She's genuinely asking me questions about what I think about things and is just taking care of me as if I were one of her own." Um, and that was very weird at first. Um, and now 13 years later, it's very different. But that first year, I was like, "Guys, what?" Like, I remember my wife calling her sister or calling her brother, texting with like the whole family would talk. And I was like, "What are you guys doing?" Like, when I went to college, my mom would call me every couple weeks just to make sure I was okay. And even then, I was like, "Oh, why is she calling me? What does she
Oh yeah,
want?"
yeah.
Um, and I'd pick up the phone. I'm like, "Everything okay on your end?" She's like, "Yeah, I just want to make sure you're okay." I'm like, "Everything's fine on my end. Thank you so much for calling." Um, and
Just trying to end the call as quickly as possible.
yeah, and or my mother was also very good, and by good I mean very adept at dropping very difficult news on you in shotgun format. Like, no, hey, brace yourself for, or call me when you have time to talk. It's like, so and so has cancer and they may not have long. And it's like, "Mom, like I was just coming out of biology class. Like, what happened?" Um, and Yeah, so it was a lot, but like I said, that's why in part that's why I appreciate my wife is she helped me mend a lot of me and
Hmm.
acknowledge to myself aspects about myself, but also to be supportive in a way that I was like, how do I put this? My wife and I got engaged in 2015. I took her back to the place in Massachusetts where we met. My mom knew I had an engagement ring. She helped me pay for part of it because I was poor. And I called her, and she knew I was going on vacation and what my intention was to do. And I call her, and I'm like, "Mom, we got engaged." And she's like, "Oh, that's great." She goes, "Your grandfather, we just found out he has cancer." And I was like, "Are you Mom?" Like, I think I said to her, I was like, "Mom, are you fucking kidding me? Like, I just told you I got engaged. I'm literally shaking with excitement, and you're telling me that my grandfather has cancer?" So,
It's like I think a lot of the time, people like that, especially parents like that. In my experience, they find because they're so unhappy in themselves,
yeah,
they find it intrusive to see you happy, and they
it's a
want to
challenge
bring you
to them.
down a step
Yeah,
just because
it's
it makes them feel better. I'm sorry to hear that she did that to you. That's really cruel.
uh,
It's
well,
really
I
cruel.
think I don't know how much of it was like intended cruelty and how much of it was like that was on her mind. And I suspect she had ADHD too. So I don't know how much of this was just in her head. And she was like, "Well, I need to get this out." And unfortunately, I was the one to call her at the time when I did. And she just went and just spit all this information out at me. And then, of course, in the moment, I want to hang up the phone and go back to the jovial state that I was in. But I'm like, well, I can't hang up on my mom telling me how her dad has cancer. So I'm stuck for like 5 minutes trying to my way through a conversation until she hits her talking end, her talking point. And I'm like, all right, mom, well, I'm going to go celebrate with my now future wife. um, good luck to you, and I'll talk to you soon, But,
I think.
but sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have cut you off.
That's okay.
I think you. I know you can't now because, if you don't mind me disclosing, I know your mother passed away. But
Yeah.
in that experience where you actually could have not listened to her and not continued the conversation, because at some point you have to stand up for yourself. And I can't remember which social media influencer it is that spoke about it. I disagree that you couldn't have continued the conversation, because at some point you have to establish your own boundaries and recognize that you deserve better than what that pressure that was being put on you. You're having a very happy, very important moment. I mean, there are certain moments in your life that are just so precious. Asking someone to marry you when they say yes is obviously telling someone you love them, you want to love them for the rest of their life, and they choose to love you back. Getting married, having kids, these are very pure, special moments in your life that don't deserve to be ruined. And if someone wants to step in and bring you down for that, I don't think you should feel obligated to finish that conversation. Yet you did. And that's because I imagine you felt you needed to serve someone else's feelings ahead of your own. Is that right? Is that fair?
Yeah, well, that was the normal kind of repartee that we had, was like, she's going to cross boundaries and overstep things or overshare things, and I'm going to endure, is I think the right word. I'm going to put up with the nonsense that's going on here. In part out of like a reflex, like an established kind of reaction to her and her approach to things, like as a kid, like, if I treat her nicely or whatever, maybe she'll be nicer back to me, et cetera, et cetera. But
Sure.
again, it's that debt you didn't know you had to pay, and the deadline was yesterday, and you're getting beat up for it, kind of thing. But
Incurring interest.
yeah, and I remember at times my wife, even when we were just dating, her feeling comfortable enough to be like, basically like, why are you putting up with this? And that was the more times we talked about it, because there were other moments in happy times where she did not, my mom did not react, and my wife would be like, why are you continuing to put up with this from her? But that was also framed from like when my wife and her mother would have an argument, they'd have the argument, they'd come to a resolution, they would talk through it. I rarely did that, and the times I did put my foot down, um it was either a firestorm response, or she would go cold and silent on me. Um, and as a kid, that's horrifying.
Oh,
When your mom or your parent, your caregiver goes silent on you, that's horrifying, because they're withholding love.
yeah, I can.
And
Go on.
no, and the last point was, withholding love is one of the most manipulative, awful things you can do to a child or anybody. But um, or it would be a firestorm response of like, you know, just it would scare me basically. And, being in my 20s, let's say, I still had those reflexive childhood responses, those poor coping mechanisms. Instead of just being like, mom, kick rocks, I don't care. Um, I still had those like scared reaction moments to say, I would tense up and freeze sometimes. But as I got, older and nearing the end of her life, I didn't know that was happening. But nearing the end of her life, I kind of, well, like basically, like once I knew I was going to become a dad, I was like, okay, you either need to shape up and kind of work with me to be grandma, or like I'm not introducing this to my child. Basically, like that's when
Oh,
I finally
100%.
found the chutzpah, as it were, to really kind of put her in line more.
Yeah.
I also was hitting a stride in life where I was like, I'm more independent, I'm more autonomous. I don't need mommy in that regard. You know what I mean? Like I'm gonna make things work in my way, and you can either join me for the happiness or you can fuck right off, basically. And then she kind of mellowed out a little. I wish I had done this sooner. It would have made things different. But I'm sorry. You were about to say something, and I
Oh,
steamrolled over you.
please don't worry. I did it to you earlier. No, I was going to tell you. Talking about withholding love. There was a time when my mother, she really lost it, and she ended up stuffing money down my throat for a crazy reason. We were struggling with money problems at the time. I didn't understand. I was 11. I said,
Yeah.
I bet you to my dad. I was right. I bet you £100. And I kept demanding £100. I was saying, why haven't you given me £100? She snapped and she stuffed money down my throat. And I nearly choked. And then my mother and my father, I think out of kindness, sent me away to my mother's brother for a week just to get me out of the house. And I came
Yeah.
back and my mother didn't talk to me for 3 weeks. And that was a very formative experience on me because I just learned to not speak to anyone and just go and do my thing. I think I ate separately at times. I wasn't allowed to sit at the dinner table. And I was given the impression that it was my fault that my mother had done this to me. I mean, when I think back about it now, it's so cold and so awful and abusive. There is no other word for it other than abuse. But when you're
Right.
10 or 11, you just simply don't understand. What are you
Right.
supposed to do?
When you
You don't have
mentioned
to say
about what,
anything. You don't have to say anything to that because it's gross. There's nothing you can say. But
no, well, the
do you
physical
remember
abuse,
anything like that happening? Anything awful?
it was it wasn't as much physical, it was more emotional in some ways.
Hmm.
But when you had mentioned about kind of locking up and being quiet, and just not talking at times, I distinctly remember being in the car. My mother was yelling at me about something. I don't remember the what prompted it, but she was really screaming or yelling.
One of the many things you've done wrong.
Right. And I learned in that moment, if I talk less, less can happen to me, more or less. And if I basically shut up and don't say much, then I can't get in trouble for much that I've said. Because I was a bit of a smartass at times. I just couldn't help it. And I mean, I was also, like 11, 12. Like, you're going to say, like, you're going to say stuff sometimes. It's just, you're also setting boundaries and pushing back on them. And you're just about to become an adolescent. That's the time in life when that really starts to happen. But I learned if I just don't talk, then there's less of a chance I can get in trouble. So that became kind of a default response to her specifically, was just, I'm just not going to talk as much. And I had a lot to say. I had a lot of thoughts and feelings about things. I just kind of held them to myself. And unfortunately, it's like poisoning yourself in that regard slowly. It's just you're aching with stress and anxiety and worry about things, but just becoming less and less responsive to things, or becoming less and less trusting in yourself or in other people to even want to open up about things, and kind of putting up walls, as it were. And then that becomes quote unquote normal to you, right? Like, that's, at least to me, that was like, I can't care if what you say can't affect me if I don't care first. But it's such an unreasonable approach on some level, because I want to care. I want to feel things. I want to do all that stuff. But I still have moments where I'm like, I'll feel the coldness of my mother coming out of me. And that actually was the reason, right before the COVID stuff happened. That's why I started therapy, was like, I'm being distant and cold and unresponsive to situations, and how much of this is depression based, or how much of this is just me, maladaptive overall and whatnot. And I don't want this for myself. I don't want this for myself, for my relationships. And also, it's doing me or it's not doing me or anybody any favors, as it were. So that's when I really started going into things and like trying to unpack and make sense of, or let go of things. And that's, like I said, it's not a perfect system. I haven't mastered it, but I'm carrying less weight with me today than I was even 2 years ago.
Never will figure it all out, especially when you're. It's like being asked to run a 400-meter race or a 100-meter race, but you've also got to run an extra 20 meters. Like, you're always playing catch up in some regard, and you can never be perfect.
Right.
You can never get it right. all right.
But for you, so you had mentioned, so what is your family dynamic? It's your parents, you. Do you have any siblings?
Non-existent. How about that?
Yeah.
My father died this year in January. I have two sisters who I don't have a relationship with.
Yeah.
And my mother, I haven't spoken to her for 3.5 years. So it's now just me, and it's been, I don't know, that's been a very reflective period, especially this year for me.
Right.
My mother I'm the eldest of three, and I think my mother used me as a way to unload her pain, essentially. And my father let that happen, and the middle sister came 18 months after me, and she grew up in this environment where the whole dynamic was like, we don't like this kid, we're mean to this kid. And so
Right.
she's grown up her whole life not treating me fairly. And also, I treated her unfairly because all I learned was pain and anger and rage and hate.
Right.
And it means we don't have a relationship. There's another sister who's 8 years younger, same thing, except really, I bullied her because she
You
was younger
could.
than me and I could be nasty to her. And I was nasty to her. And unfortunately, that is just a bond that, as much as I've tried to fix as I've got older, there's just too much baggage there. Despite the fact that she was always my favorite member of the family because she was quite young, she was sweet, she
Right.
wasn't as vicious as my other sister. My other sister is just gone. So no, it's just me. Why do you ask? I mean, I'm not afraid to tell you, but
Yeah. No,
why?
I was thinking about my family dynamic. It's my parents and my brother and I. Somewhat similar. It's me as the oldest, and my brother is 16 months younger than me. So
Almost the
I,
same. October to May, so 19 months. So my
yeah.
sister's younger than me.
And because my brother and I were so close in age that it was like if I was in first grade, he was in kindergarten or, something
Mm.
like that. So it was, and now with my experience as a parent, I don't know how my parents got through that because you're literally getting one child pregnant, second child. So you're going through diapers and waves and then potty training and the financial stresses of things. There's no real separation of the two. Um, and was, I would, I was made to feel like I was a difficult kid. I
Yeah, same.
struggled. I struggled substantially in school. Didn't
Same.
know I had ADHD. Didn't find that out until high school, which contextualizes retrospectively, like that explains a lot. Um, but my brother was closer to my dad. My dad was military, like he enlisted in the Vietnam. He enlisted in the Marine Corps for the Vietnam War. So, like, if you want to talk about like a tough guy, like a man's man, kind of, that was my dad.
Sure.
And and then in my family, they owned an auto body shop. So he took over that business when he came home and my grandfather retired. So my dad's a working with his hands guy. He's that way, or was, I should say. He's passed. But um, my brother wanted to be my dad. He loved watching war movies and Rambo and getting his hands dirty and all that stuff. And I was this sensitive kid who was chubby, and I cried a lot, and I didn't feel that things were fair, but I didn't understand why. But I knew something was unfair in this dynamic. And my mother, like you had mentioned, my mom was pretty vicious at times. My dad sometimes let it happen, but I think he was having his own relationship issues and he was just at work a lot. Because he owned the business, so he always had the excuse of, well, I got to go down to the shop and fix something or do something, paperwork, etc. So there were like days on end where he'd leave before we kind of woke up, and he'd come home after we were getting ready to go to bed. Um, and to me, that was normal because that was just in our house. And then I talked to friends, they're like, yeah, my dad works till like 4 o'clock and he comes home. And I was like, your dad doesn't work on the weekends too? And what do you mean he's home? Like, what are you talking about? But I caught the brunt of a lot. And then the reason I asked you about your family too was like, so for many years in my early adult years, my brother and I didn't talk. Like, he joined the Marine Corps. He did his thing like my dad. We could not have been more oil and water in that regard. And we stopped talking for a while. There was this animosity that was manufactured. It wasn't real. And what we discovered was that my mother was the one pitting us kind of against each other.
Oh yeah.
And
Would because you were always the kid that could never do something right, and you were always the bad one. Your brother was the one that would help your mother feel validated and feel loved and respected, and she would get what she needed out of him. So he was the good kid, you were the bad kid.
so what's interesting, and I didn't find this out until after my mother passed, and my brother and I would say reconciled. We're much more amicable now than we were even 5 years ago.
But still
What
not
I
close,
didn't
right? Amicable, but not close.
we're making up for lost time. Like he's got
Okay, cool.
kids, he has older kids than I do. I think what happened was my mother died and we had time to talk and we kind of feeled each other out for like, do we want to continue a relationship? Are we brothers in name only? Like, how do we kind of want to make this work? And I approached it with no pressure. I was like, look, dude, like if we want to continue on and build something from nothing or rebuild and whatever, that's cool. If there's too much sour grapes and bad blood and we just can't mutually, because I'm not putting in all the effort, I'm not dealing with that. But if that's not going to happen, let's call it what it is. And let's just not have animosity, but we'll just kind of be indifferent to each other at best.
Shake hands and move on. Be respectful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I will say, to my brother's credit and to my own credit, we did genuinely try to talk more. And I noticed things were getting a little better when we would talk and he wouldn't dominate conversation as much. He would actually talk to me and ask me how things are going with my kids and my life and everything. And I was like, okay, maybe, I'm not pushing anything. I'm not expecting anything. Let's just kind of keep things loose and see where it goes. And a couple of years down the road, we're doing okay compared to how it was a few years ago. But what I didn't know many years ago was that my mother was also being really terrible to him too. And part of the reason why he wanted to be in the military and I suspect part of the reason why he wanted to go to a military high school was that he needed to get out of our house. He couldn't put up with the nonsense from my mother, wanted the military anyway, and found a military high school. He went and interviewed for it. They asked him some questions, and he answered it apparently really well. And in some cases, military schools, like, you're in a lot of trouble in schools, and, like, we don't know what else to do with you, and this is going to straighten you out. My brother was actually one of the ones that wanted to be there, and they loved him because he actually cared about what he was doing. And he ended up joining the Marine Corps and getting a girl pregnant that he married for a bit and this whole thing. But he filled in some of the pieces to the puzzle well after the fact that I didn't know about. And then I started seeing him differently. And I think he actually tried to protect me at times. It's just we were so unsupervised and two boys of almost the same age. We fought. Like, we just had this pent up frustration at each other, at ourselves, at our family, whatever. We took it out on each other. And I didn't know at times he was protecting me because he never told me. For one reason or another, I had no idea. And then after he let me in on some of that information after my mother's passing, I was like, okay, there's clearly a lot more to the story than that I didn't know. Let's try to see if we can maybe talk about some stuff, or I give you a clean sweep, you give me a fresh start, and let's build on our relationship as mature adults as opposed to hard-headed young men, you know. So that's why I'm thinking, and obviously I don't know the dynamics or the specifics to you and your family, but I guess in my head, with my experiences, if this was 5 years ago, I'd be like, yeah, man, like this is never going to change. But you never quite know what event might lead to what change and in what circumstances where you and one of your sisters, perhaps your younger sister right now, might say, you know what? We dealt with a lot of nonsense, like a lot of manipulation, a lot of maladaptive coping mechanisms, etc. Can we put some of that behind us and reconcile as adult? And again, I'm not speaking for you, but I would wonder for you, if that would be possible, let's say down the line. And I think my brother took some time to really look at himself and kind of get over his masculine nonsense, his masculine nonsense. And for me to perhaps look at myself and go, was I truly being fair to him, or was I being manipulated into believing he didn't like me? And once we kind of came to that realization together, we're in a better spot than we were a few years ago.
Dude, I'm really pleased for you. I've got to be honest, I'm feeling a range of emotions. The first that I focused on is that I'm really pleased for you that you got that into that place with your brother, because I don't know, it takes maturity from both sides to recognize how messed up things were. And it takes care and desire from both sides to build a relationship like that. So I'm really pleased for you. For me, it's the complete opposite. I hadn't seen my sister, the older one, for 9 years until my dad's funeral. And you've got to understand, this is someone that I lived with for 18 years, my first 18 years of my life. And I really hoped it would be different, but came back and she is just as abusive and manipulative and cold and mean. And unfortunately, I think it's just that is who she is, because she learned that being mean and cruel and laughing at me or making jokes at my expense would curry favor with our mother. In my opinion, she's a narcissist. My mother's a narcissist, in my opinion, and she's taken on that same role. And I think unable to see how flawed she is. Like I said, I'm in this period of trying to reflect on who I am and get better, but she's so self-absorbed and believes she's superior because she grew up in that environment where she was superior. And I mean, don't get me wrong, she's still got her problems. As far as I know, she's an alcoholic, or certainly just drinking way too much. My father died in January. I'd gone to Australia to see someone that same time, and both him and his stepwife, which is another story. My stepmother, his new wife, hid from me how ill he was, and I didn't know he was going to die until like 3 days before, and I was in Australia and I couldn't get back in time. Even now, my sister, the last time we really spoke was in May, and she was abusive to me for not being there for my father. But the truth is, I didn't know how ill he was. Both of my sisters were. I didn't spend Christmas with my family for. I think the last time I did, I was 22. I'm now 35. So I didn't see my father deteriorate in the way that they did. And I mean, this is just a sob story at this point.
No, it's real.
Well, yeah, maybe if it gives someone out there some comfort to know they're not alone. For me, and that's what it says, at some point you've got to take responsibility for your own behavior and what you did. And at some point there is some flaw in your side, or you could do things slightly differently. And growing up, I wasn't kind to them because they weren't kind to me. But they're so fixated, my mother and my two sisters, on me being the evil one and the bad kid and all of these things, that they refuse to see the good parts of me that I am now. And I'm an incredibly good person. I love who I am. I'm still very flawed, but at my core, I'm kind and loving, which is the most important part of me. And they refuse to acknowledge that. And if someone refuses to see the good parts of you and is determined to be unkind to you and mean and cruel, vicious, then they aren't worth it. And you need to just step away. As difficult as that is, I'm desperate to be loved. I really, almost too much. I want to be wanted by people, but you've got to be wanted by the right people. And my family are just the wrong people. And the other part of that is that they're on one side. So there's my mother's side, and then there's my mother's mother. My mother's father is gone, and then loads of cousins and aunts. I keep hearing through the grapevine how my aunt or my cousin thinks I'm a piece of shit because of stuff that they've said. Yet they won't give me the chance in letting me be me. Yes. So I think one day they might see this podcast and go, oh, so he's not so bad, but it's kind of too late for them, you know?
I'm with you. And loss. Also, and it sounds like because you've decided to prioritize your own well-being and because you intend on living a happier life and grow and reflect, like everything you said, I would assume for some of your family members, they would be almost impossible for them to do that in a meaningful way. Like, I picture if my mother were alive next to me right now, how often would she actually reflect in a meaningful way as opposed to her just kind of placing fault on others so that it doesn't come back to her, right? Like a stopgap of, well, it's not my fault because, X, Y, and Z. I did everything right. It's other people that are idiots or whatever. Um, and I empathize also with what you're saying because I can't imagine creating life and then resenting it on some level, or creating other life and then pitting those lives against each other and deriving any kind of, I wouldn't even say happiness, because I don't think it spawns from that. I think it's just all all eyes must be on me, all love must at the end of the day revert back to me, and any derivation from that will be dealt with more or less. And any and everything that I, as the, let's say the narcissist, can do to maintain good status or stature, or if everyone looks at me in high regard, then I must be better than others. There was someone in my life until recently, they're now gone, and I praise whatever's out in the universe for this change, because they
Passed
were
away or
also
cut off?
relationship ended. And
Okay.
for all, like, you have to know that you suck as a human being when a relationship ends, this person's gone. And my family's immediate reaction was, oh yes, like, good. There was not an ounce of, oh no, what is this going to mean? It was, yes, like, this is amazing for
Oh wow.
for the person close to me. And all I've thought about is how much time and energy and resources have been wasted on this person, what they might think of things and how they're going to react, and making them happy more. And you get like swindled into this mindset of, so and so is very important, so we need to, all efforts must be made to keep them happy, when you're like, why am I so incredibly tense on Christmas or Thanksgiving? Like, why is my holiday hanging in the balance of what this person thinks? And then they're gone, and you're like, okay, it's different, but I'm having a great time right now. Like, I might not love the change. I might not be happy with doing things a little differently, but I can absolutely see why this is much better for me. It might be quieter, it might be louder, it might be whatever you want it to be in that way. And it's just like, this is good. This is actually everything. I have more control of what makes me happy now, because I don't have to compete with this person. If that
Sometimes,
uh if that
sometimes the
resonates at
universe
all with
gives you
you.
a sign, doesn't it? And acts for you, and you don't know you wanted that decision. It's like getting fired from a job you hate. Like
Right.
you keep doing it because you need the money and you need the income, and perhaps you think you want the stability. But within a few days, you realize, thank Christ. At the moment,
Right.
I can't get a job in my industry in the Netherlands, and it's been incredibly difficult. I haven't really worked this year,
Yeah.
but it's forced me to go down a completely different path, and I don't miss it at all because I hated it and I just did it because I like
Right.
the money. And it sounds like a similar situation for this person, whoever they were. I hope they're all
Yeah.
right, just for their own sake, but at the same time, stuff them, right?
Well, that's, yeah. I When I heard the news, I was like indifferent. I went from like to, oh, this is actually, like you said about getting fired. You have a moment of like, oh, what's going to happen, and then you have a few minutes to exist in this new reality, and you're like, oh, this is so much better. Like, for one reason or another, this is head and shoulders. It's this extra weight is taken off me in that way. Um. Uh. But what you were saying about the job stuff, like the last job I had before I'm doing what I'm doing now, I went into it thinking, I'm going to make a change. I'm going to do all this stuff. And I did, to an extent. And I told you the other day, I got hired. I got the contract literally as the COVID lockdowns were happening. So I couldn't even like go in my new office. I couldn't rearrange anything. I couldn't do anything for weeks. And I did it for 2 years, and the first year was very turbulent because this was like a lot of egos, a lot of people involved who felt like they wanted to have a say in the change in the process. And I was new, and some people pick up on that. They pick up on like the insecurity, or you don't quite know what the answer is because you haven't done it in this capacity. And they're like, oh,
Especially
maybe
if,
I can.
especially if you let them, because, and naturally to some extent, people like you and I will let them because you're unsure of yourself. You're not clear on your thinking. That people naturally do take advantage of that situation, whether they mean to or not. Some people definitely mean to and are
Right.
cruel
Yeah.
individuals, and some people are just whatever.
Right. Yeah. And the masks kind of came off a little bit from some people, but the first year was
The
very
COVID
turbulent.
masks.
Yeah, but also like but also the true intentions behind some of their actions. And the second year was not much better. But in all honesty, I was getting wrapped up in what's best for the institution and enrollment and the sales aspect, the business side of things. And I was like, I'm not a salesperson. I'm not a businessman in that regard. Like, you hired me, and I want also at the same time, I want to do this job because I believe in what this job affords students. But the more I'm getting pulled into side conversations about how the sausage is made, and I'm like, oh, like I get that we have to make money and we have to keep the lights on, but also, if this is the basis of how you look at me, then fine, you know? So perhaps I was a little naive going into it. I don't know, but I truly was only really focusing on the students that I was working with and the students within a specific program. And um, I carried that same energy with me when I was teaching classrooms and work with people in small groups or one to one, like I do now. Like, yes, there is a money component to things, of course, but that's not my focus. That's not what drives me to do what I do.
No, you're a naturally caring, compassionate person, and you want the best for people. And especially when we're
Right.
talking about kids, you being a people pleaser as well, for want of a better word, you're desperate to do the right thing for other people. So
Yeah.
who gives a shit about the budget or the timetable or stuff like that? You just want to make sure that people are all right, especially in an incredibly turbulent time that
Yeah.
we went through that was, I hope, quite unique. I think that probably, correct me if I'm wrong, played a part in it, where the unpredictability of the situation we were in also causes anxiety and uncertainty in other people. And
Yeah.
maybe they could only create certainty and get some control through their work as well. And
Yeah.
maybe that
I
manifested in taking advantage of
yeah.
someone who's a bit more, yeah, you.
I think they were going from the person who had previously had run the program for like almost 2 decades. So it was also like a pretty substantive change in terms of leadership and direction and everything. Um, but ultimately, what came to the ending here was I decided to leave. I was done, and I also was like my daughter was 15, 16, 8, she was like a year and a half, let's say. And I just wasn't happy, and I'd come home unhappy, and I just felt very disconnected, and I would just look at her and be like, this is too important, this is too precious, and this is so, developmentally speaking, this is such fertile ground for me to be a part of it, and I'm not sometimes. And she doesn't deserve that, I don't deserve that, my family doesn't deserve that. Something has to change. And I took the leap of faith and I decided to leave, and I spent a year being a stay-at-home dad. And you know I had my moments where I'm like, I'm killing it as a dad. I had other days where I'm like, I can't, like, I need a break. I can't do this every day. How do people do this? Um, and then last year, I was like, let me branch out basically on my own. So I started an educational consulting company, or that makes it sound bigger than it is. It's a small business, but um, every time I'd come back to what makes me happy and how do I feel like I can affect change in others, I would just think about myself in middle and high school and how all over the place I was in every regard, and how I just needed one person to be like a constant source of support but guidance for me, and how much difference that could have made, you know. But instead of going down the rabbit hole of the could have beens and the should have beens and why wasn't I and this and that and it wasn't fairs, I decided I can't undo what happened. I've gone in a pretty positive direction anyway. And what is stopping me from being that person for other people now? And the answer was me. Like, I was holding myself back because I didn't trust in myself that I could do it. So I decided to try it. And it also afforded me the opportunity to be home. So I could have the best of both worlds in that way. And then I got into like video stuff like we talked about with YouTube and all the nonsense that goes into editing video and everything.
Yeah.
And then podcasting, because the other hat that I was wearing in college was being a professor, a lecturer.
Yeah.
In my area, it's an adjunct. It's like you're on contract for one semester for one or two courses. I wasn't like a full-time faculty member, but I still got to be in that world. And that was another experience in trusting myself where I was like, you know what? My first year teaching adolescent psychology was very bumpy. I was uncomfortable. I was teaching with PowerPoints, which, no offense to anybody who uses them, I can't. I can't do it. Um, if you've ever been in a presentation with PowerPoints, all you're doing is reading what's on the board. You're not listening to the
Yeah.
person talk.
No.
And, I was visibly uncomfortable in my 3-hour lectures. The next year, I said, you know what? PowerPoint's out the window. I don't like it. It's distracting. It takes too much time. I'm going to map out my notes in a way that suits me as a lecturer. And I became, not overnight, but that next fall, the 2019, the next time I taught it, I was observed by the same faculty member as part of like your evaluations. They have to observe you. And he saw me at the very first time, the second, the third, and the fourth time teaching it. So each time I got kind of like a core sample of growth from him in his feedback. And every semester he'd give me some little things to tweak and some ideas. And every time I would purposefully, that next class, go in and hit the ground running with what he suggested so that I wouldn't forget it and it would become automatic. And I will say, I don't toot my own horn. My first semester to the second, third, fourth, and to the last time I taught where he observed me, he's like, it's so different in such a good way. Like, like I'm not the world's greatest at it, but like, he goes, you're truly growing and listening. Like you're genuinely putting the time and the effort into this. Like he's like, a lot of faculty, like a lot of people I observe they just completely disregard what I say and nothing changes. He's like, but you're genuine. And I was like, yeah, I have big shoes to fill as far as I'm concerned, because there's a lot of great faculty here. And I want to, I don't think I'll become like the long term in that way, but for as long as I'm here, these kids are paying, or someone is paying good money to be in here. I'm being paid not so good money to be standing here. But I'm gonna give them every bit of what I have. I'm going to make it entertaining at times, but I'm going to make sure that everyone, including myself, when you leave this classroom, you are going to have learned something important to you. You're going to have made personal connections that hopefully will help you have those aha moments. And if nothing else, you're going to hopefully take something that I taught you or showed you into some career in the future where you can be a better person or a more established professional, whatever. Like, I don't take my job lightly at all. But I'm very light on my feet, if that makes sense. Like I care a lot, but it sometimes comes off effortlessly, like when I'm really relaxed and in my mode. But that's why I wanted to do the podcast thing, because I'm like, this just speaks to me. No pun intended. Like, this is something that I like doing. So instead of telling myself, well, that's a dumb idea, or who's going to listen to you, etc., I was like, you know what? It costs me $300, let's say, to get myself set up, and I'm going to try it. And if nothing else, it's a cool artifact for my kids to find in a couple of years, maybe, if they Google my name.
I just want to clarify as well, when you talk about the feedback you were getting from, did you say it was a professor?
Yeah, every adjunct has to be observed each semester by a full-time faculty member in their department.
I'm guessing you probably also really enjoyed getting constructive, positive, and structured feedback rather than aggressive, emotional, unpredictable environmental feedback that you got as a kid. So to have someone really want to nurture you, of course you're going to take it on and you're going to want to improve because you've got someone who's really batting for you. Perhaps you understand, right?
That's an interesting idea. I remember the first time doing the observation work or getting observed and having the debriefing afterwards. I walked in shaking. And the faculty member who I got to know personally too, we're talking and I'm not really responding and I'm kind of blank. And he looks at me and goes, like, are you okay? like genuinely concerned. And I was like, yeah, I'm okay. He was like, dude, you're totally fine. Like, the feedback I'm going to give you is like, you got some stuff that everyone has to iron out. Like, it's not like you did such a bad job that I'm here to fire you kind of thing. He's like, you're very new. That's very noticeable, but you work on it. You get some extra experiences, some extra semesters. And once he started talking also about the future, like this isn't just a one and done. Cause I also sometimes deal with like the imposter phenomenon of like,
Oh,
clearly
I
this
think
was
we
a
both do.
mistake.
Yeah.
Like once he started talking in future terms, like, when you come back next year and do it again, I was like, okay, all right, like, I think we're okay now. And after that, and I did say to him, I was like, listen, are you cool with me asking you questions? Are you cool with doing another observation at another time? Like, are you okay with this stuff? And he's like, bring it on. Like, if I have time, I'll always email, always answer your emails. You can always find me during office hours. But like, if we can coordinate a second observation, let's do it. Like, show me. Um, and then the pressure really came off me. And then I was like, all right, if you want to see growth, I'm going to show you some growth, buddy. And
And the
um,
real you can come out as well because there's less
yeah,
expectation. Like sometimes I find it difficult on the podcast to really relax and be me because I know that people are watching me and I've
right.
been trained to worry what people think.
Yes.
I'd much rather
Yes.
be sat across from you having a chat over a cup of coffee.
Oh,
But
100%. No,
this is the
you
best we can do for
constantly
now.
have to do the inventory scan of, is this it? Is this the bad thing that I do, or is this the dumb thing I'm going to say? And then after a while, like I got over that headspace when I was teaching, because it's here in the present with everybody looking at me, and if I'm super uncomfortable, they get super uncomfortable. Like we talked about earlier about conversations or whatever. Like if I'm coming off weird, they're going to start tightening up on me because they don't know what to do with my energy. Um, and yeah, like after a while, I was like, you know what? Who gives a shit what they think? Like in a constructive way. Like
Yeah, of
obviously I
course.
care what I do, but I gotta stop worrying about if everyone likes me or if everyone's really enjoying this or if I'm really changing their lives. I got a job to do. I'm gonna put all of my effort into this and I'm gonna give them hopefully the best lecture they're gonna hear today. And if they acknowledge that, that's amazing. If they tune me out, that's their goddamn choice at this point. Like, they're not children. These are adults for all intents and purposes. So I'm going to give you whatever I got and all I got, and you're going to hopefully stay with me here. And then I started to realize too, and I'm doing it now, I have a tendency to talk at length. And that's fine if I'm
Now you're
going somewhere.
overthinking it. Now you're worrying about it.
But what
When
I
you need
began
to.
to do is I began to, and this was part of the feedback I got, was pause, assess, ask a question, invite a topic for conversation, get someone else to talk. It brings your heart rate back down. You can think the next talking point, you can relay to students, you can get to know them. Basically, there's all this untapped potential and opportunity in front of you. But if you're so hyper focused on getting all the talking points out and being a really quote unquote good teacher, you're kind of falling short in some way. Like if someone just sat and spoke at you for 90 straight minutes, how long can you really sustain your attention on them? But that's
I don't
why
know.
even when,
We've gone for 91 minutes, so
yeah,
I think we've kept our focus on each other.
yeah. But like I said, I have learned over time, the hyperactive part of me is the talkative type, is the talking component. Um, but I have sort of an inbuilt like I've purposely built an in brain kind of alarm system of, okay, you're really taking up a lot of words in conversation here in space. Let's pull it back a bit. Remember that you're talking to a person or people, what have you, and let's try to stay open to other people and not just, you know, really trying to hit all those talking points that I want to talk about.
Well, look, I wouldn't worry. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I think you have a hell of a lot to offer. I'm actually going to wrap it up now because we have gone for 90 minutes easily. And we haven't even got
Oh
into
wow,
half
yeah.
the things I wanted to talk to you about. And I'm running out of time because I've got to go and do another interview. But I'd love to have you back because we didn't even really get into detail about ADHD, your business now. I wanted to talk about your work and what you're doing, your care of children, also your daughters.
Hmm.
I think this is a. I'm just going to wrap this up now. Bye for now, and
Yeah.
I'll see you again. How's that sound?
All right. That sounds awesome. Yeah, let's definitely reconnect.